Hi everyone, welcome to the October 14th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, without my usual co-host today, Craig Mulkowski. He is still on vacation this week, celebrating his 30th wedding anniversary, so again, happy anniversary to Craig. I was happy to have Marcus Hirsch on earlier this week to do a recap of some of last week's Breeders' Cup prep races and looking a little bit forward to the Breeders' Cup in just over 3.5 weeks. This week, we're going to be looking ahead to the upcoming weekend of stakes racing, focusing on at Keeneland on Saturday. Their future race there is the Grade 1 Queen Elizabeth II Challenge Cup. That is race 9 of 10. On this podcast, we're going to go over the late pick 5 sequence, races 6 through 10, and I'm happy to have another guest on to fill in Craig's shoes to talk about this sequence, and that is Scott Carson. Scott is the founder of Sport of Kings and had a major role in Public Handicapper before that. So, Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. And I'm honored because I listen to the pod just about every week, and I love hearing your and Craig's take.
That's awesome. And I know that you have your own podcast, that we have a pretty similar format that you do with your Sport of Kings co-host, Chris Larmy. So talk a little bit about that and your work with Sport of Kings in general.
Well, we've been doing the pod for over 3 years, and it's pretty cool. It's a little time consuming now that I'm working full time, so it's a little tighter. I mean, the time is tighter. The pod itself isn't necessarily tighter. And then I also run Sport of Kings, which is really pretty much a hobby at this point. I still have aspirations at some point that a major sponsor will sponsor that free contest that includes free DRFTVs. So if you haven't heard about it or if you haven't checked it out, go to sportofkings.net. In the meantime, you know, we do still have an NHC qualifier, which it's probably a little late if you're if you're a contest player and you're thinking about trying to qualify. Right now, it's a little late to join our contest, but it's a cool contest and it's worth signing up so that you'll know about it for next year.
And now Sport of Kings is like the outgrowth of what Public Handicapper was. And I know that you had a role in that for a very long time and running contests and connecting horse players. And I know that's been a great resource for people to meet up, play these contests for many years.
Yeah, I probably half my horse playing friends I've met through Public Handicapper, had a bunch of editors on Public Handicapper, still occasionally see a Public Handicapper shirt out there. And a lot of the people I know who are younger players it was like one of their stopping off points where they played Public Handicapper for a while. So, you know, I'm kind of proud of having that little bit of history, and occasionally I go to the Wayback Machine and look at our terrible graph.
That's awesome. Well, I know you and Chris often have some good guests on your Sport of Kings podcast, and you do plenty of handicapping there. I try to listen when I can, and you're somebody who likes to look for different angles to approach the races, find some prices, so hopefully we can do that in this Keeneland Pick 5 sequence that we're going to tackle, and it's definitely not easy. Pretty wide open races, including the feature, which I think is going to have a big favorite. We'll get to that in a little bit, but Scott, the first couple legs of this sequence that we begin with definitely doesn't make it easy on the horse player, as they're hard races to really narrow down to one or two runners. They seem like spread events, both of them maiden special weights. Let's dive into the first leg of this sequence, race 6. It's a maiden special weight event going 1 1/16 miles on the dirt course for older fillies and mares, and it's a field of 8, so not the largest field we're going to see at Keeneland, but there's no real center to this race. I guess the number 7 Sunny River is going to take a lot of money for trainer Brad Cox. She's run well in all 4 of her starts, but she's officially settled for second in all 4 of them.
Yeah, it's when I was handicapping this sequence, I was not thrilled with it. I was thinking, wow, David's probably bumming out about this sequence as well. It's got 2, I guess, is it 2 maidens? No, or is the second leg?
The second leg's a maiden race as well. Yeah,
second leg is a maiden race. Yeah, so we have 2 maidens, and they're kind of tough. The 6th race is really tough because you got these horses that have been supposed to win, and they've been favored and they just haven't won. And the question is, do you go with one of them or do you try to find a fresh face? And it's kind of hard to find a fresh face in this bunch.
It is. I was trying to get a little bit creative here because these horses that have been running pretty well, they've all had their chances. And I mean, Sunny River, I think, is the one that's going to take most of the money. She did at least cross the wire first one time, was disqualified in that race at Churchill back in June. Since then, though, she's had chances to break through at very short prices, even money two back, 4 to 5 last time at Churchill. And that last race, I went back and watched it, and she really hung through the stretch, could not get past a 29 to 1 shot late that she was really supposed to beat. I know the speed figures have come back fine, but she's stretching out to 2 turns for the first time. There are just enough questions with this filly that I'm not inclined to take a short price on her, but I certainly recognize that she can win this race. I don't really want to get knocked out of the sequence if she wins, since I do have some price ideas in later races. So she's the kind of horse that I have to use reluctantly. A horse that I think is going to take money in here that I'm less enthused by is the number 4, Inventing, who ran a big speed figure on debut for Todd Pletcher, but I just feel like she's been taking steps backwards with each start since then, has not been progressing, which you typically like to see from the Todd Pletcher barn when they take steps backwards. I think that's a bad sign. So I was looking to fade her a little bit more, but I guess there are some other ways to go in here. I'll throw it to you, though, to see if you had any more clever ideas.
Okay, well, the one thing I was a little bit more impressed with Sunny River's last race than you were. I'm not saying that it's a great pick, but it's the horse that I think is the most likely winner. The horse that beat her, that was 29 to 1, did come back and win via disqualification. So at least at least you got that. And watching the race, Sunny River was wide the entire way, started from the 12 hole. Given that, and given that Jag Warrior had a pretty good trip, I think it's sort of okay that she didn't close the deal. And I would think that she's going to romp in this race. Inventing, I wasn't very impressed with her last race. She not only was no match for the winner, she was caught for second, and then she weakened on the gallop out. And then the 8 horse Forever After All, who was the other one who, at least was 3 to 5 in its last race. I didn't really have an excuse in that last race, and failed as the favorite. And I just don't see why she's going to do it here. So I'm inclined to use Sunny River, and maybe just only use Sunny River, and leave it at that.
Yeah, I was initially trying to make a case for Forever After All, that Al Stall horse drawn on the outside, but the more I looked, the less I really found reasons to like her. She's a horse where Craig's speed figures, the TimeformUS speed figures, are a little bit out of sync with the Beyer numbers. Beyer has her rated much higher than Craig does, and it's hard to know which one's right. They haven't been the livest races that she's been exiting. Horses that she finished ahead of her haven't exactly come back to do particularly well. Insignia or She's Keen that won 2 and 3 back. So she's okay. She's the younger half-sister to Tom Stay Todd, who was that excellent horse for Al Stall a number of years ago. Clearly, she doesn't possess quite that level of ability. I just think that she's a contender in here, but I wouldn't want to take any kind of short price on her. The one other horse that I was trying to make a case for, and I would use her if she is going to be anything close to the morning line price, we'll see, is the number 1, Oma the Great. I know she hasn't run well in either start, low speed figures finishing pretty far back, but she feels like the kind of horse that's supposed to appreciate added ground, daughter of Tappet. She's had subtle trouble in both of those races. First time out, just kind of having to navigate her way through traffic, a little bit buried inside, breaking from the rail. And then last time out, got shuffled back on the far turn, and it looked like she was racing a little bit keenly past the half-mile pole. Again, did no running after that brief trouble, but now she's coming back off a long layoff, has switched over to Rudy Brissett, who does a good job, and just feel like stretching out the 2 turns might suit her, and this is not the toughest maiden race that you're going to see. So if she's a price, she's one that I definitely want to include, but I agree, this is a tough spot to get too creative in.
Yeah, I mean, Oma the Great, I was trying to make a case for her, and like, if any horse is going to sort of step up as a new face, I would think it is Oma the Great. Has a solid workout, a nice 59.4 gait workout coming into this, and is supposed to be a good horse, I guess. I mean, tap it out of a violence mare, but no siblings or dam races to look at. I don't know. I mean, I'm I it, it's let's put it this way. If I feel like I don't have the confidence in Sunny River to win this race, I'd probably add Oma the Great to my ticket in some form or another.
No, I feel your hesitation because I also was looking to find more than I actually found there in the pedigree and the prior races. She's a little hard to make, but if you're trying to find somebody to take a shot against the favorites with, I feel like she's one of the few places that you can go in this race.
Yeah, and besides that workout, one thing that is kind of nice to note, which I just noticed while we were talking, is that Rudy Brissett is 1 for 8 at Keeneland, but he's 4 for 8 in the exacta. After the first week. So, maybe he's got his horses ready to fire.
Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, race 7. Again, this is a maiden special weight event, but now we're going over to the 2-year-old division, as this is a race for the juveniles going a mile on the turf course at Keeneland. And we've got a full field signed on, actually an oversubscribed field, as there are 4 runners on the also eligible list. And this race, Scott, just seems totally wide open. It's hard to know where to start. I don't envy the new Keeneland morning line maker, Nick Tamero, trying to make a morning line in this race, because there's just not a whole lot of turf form to base opinions off of. I would imagine that a horse like the number 4 Worthington is going to attract support because he at least has that solid turf race in his debut at Kentucky Downs. I thought put in a pretty good effort that day, stalking the pace, just got a little bit tired late, but the winner that day, Gaslight Dancer, did come back to run reasonably well in the futurity last week at Aqueduct, so I think it validates the form of that race a little bit, and I kind of did view him as the horse to beat, though there are definitely some prices you can make a case for in this race.
I agree. I mean, I'd have to say logically, Worthington would be my top choice. Watched the race and looked absolutely fine, and you've got to figure is going to improve. But there's also a couple of prices in here that I'm interested in. So, Worthington, I don't know, maybe the horse is 7-2, maybe it's 3-1. But I'm going to go deep no matter what in this race.
Yeah, the other horse that's listed as a short price on the morning line is the number 11, Ashcroft, and I'm definitely less interested in him, especially if he takes that much money. This horse was a little bit cold on the board when he made his debut at Keeneland all the way back in April. None Hudson was the Wesley Ward horse that took much more money and won that race. I just don't like Wesley Ward with this kind of move. Stretching out in distance, his numbers are pretty bad, especially with second-time starters in maiden races, turf routes. He's just 3 for 29, 10%, 62-cent ROI over the past 5 years, if you look that up in Formulator. This horse does have turf pedigree, but this is just not the kind of Wesley Ward horse that interests me.
Yeah, I don't know. This is why this was such a painful pick 5 for me, because I was looking at this race and I was like, you gotta use Ashcroft, don't you? The dam was pretty fast on turf and won a stake on synth. It's got a 47.4 gate work coming into this, but it is in the 11 hole and it's Wesley Ward. I don't know. I think the best bet might be to see how the horse is being bet in the double before playing the pick 5, and just see like if it's getting action, that it may be well meant. Then it's hard to sort of skip over a Wesley Ward that's getting action at Keeneland. If it's not getting any action, then you're going to get a price, but you're also probably not going to win with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Wesley Ward is the kind of trainer that usually takes money when his horses are alive, and it wouldn't be a surprise if this one does take money with Irad Ortiz aboard. All of his mounts seem to get bet quite heavily, even though this one's drawn in a wide post position. Getting away from those two favorites, was there anybody else in this race at bigger prices that you were looking to upgrade, horses that you think might fly under the radar? Because there are definitely runners in this race that have a look to them, whether they are lightly raced and have the right to improve or have some hidden turf pedigree. I think that there are some things to find with some other horses in this race.
Yeah, there's a couple prices that I very reluctantly, I I think that I have to use, even though the statistics are very weak. And the first one is I think it's the 5 My Sanctuary. This trainer never wins first time starter turf route. In fact, he's 0 for 40. Ian Wilkes. He's 0 for 40. He's had 1 second, 4 in the money. The 1 second I think was 26-1. And he's also 0 for 40 first time starters at the track. However, this isn't the strongest field. And the horse has a nice workout of 47.4 gate work. And it also has a couple of siblings who have won on the turf. So, in a race that I think is pretty wide open, I think I may, use this one. And then the other one that also doesn't have the great stats, but is interesting is the 8 Daryl's Bolt, who first raced on the dirt sprinting and had a severe bump after that at the start. So it was way back and ended up being against a speed flow as perceived by racingflow.com. And, made up some ground, and it was just a useful beginner effort. And then in the breeding aspect of it, the stats that are no good are that the trainer going second out, sprinter out, dirt to turf, he's 0 for 7 with no horses in the money. But he does have a 262 ROI, and this horse is a half to a turf winner that was by Go Sapper, and this one's by Bolt Doro, who has a little bit of has gotten some turf winners. So those are the two that interest me the most. But I'd be interested to hear your take, because I know you get pretty deep into the pedigree.
Yeah, I definitely gave a look to both of those horses. I always struggle with horses like My Sanctuary, the Ian Wilkes first-time starter. I feel like I'm always tempted to fall for these horses, and they so rarely win. As you cited the statistics, they're pretty terrible. But when he does win, 1 out of every 50 times or so, it's with a gigantic price. You just have to be, right in finding that one horse in the haystack that's going to be successful. I feel like I was burned by an Ian Wilkes horse at Saratoga recently when I thought there was one the last couple of weekends that looked like it was working so well. Just seemed like one that was so well prepped to win on debut, and the jockey rode it like they made no attempt to win, even though the horse clearly had ability. It just feels like that is so often Ian Wilkes' MO, that he's almost trying to give these horses experience before they get serious. So I agree. This horse has plenty of turf pedigree, and I like the workouts. I wonder if this is the right time, but it will be a price. I'm not going to talk anybody off that horse. And I agree. The number 8, Daryl's Bolt, definitely has plenty of pedigree. You mentioned Bolt Doro having some success in the Dam side. The Dam is a half-sister to Straight Story, who was a winner of the Grade 1 Jamaica back in the early 2000s on the turf. So definitely a ton of turf pedigree here. The Dam sire is Heart's Cry, who is an excellent Japanese turf horse. So I really do think Daryl's Bolt is going to appreciate getting on the turf. I'll mention 2 other long shots that interested me. One of them, I'm not sure how big a price he's going to be, because he's going out for strong connections. That's the number 9, Team Leader. I just think this horse is a turf horse if he's anything. I know that he's taken money and disappointed in both starts so far, but the pedigree says turf. He's by Street Boss, who I really like as a turf influence. The Dam side, the Dam's had some decent turf production, but the Dam herself is a full sister to a mare named Tizaquina, who was a stakes winner on the turf and synthetic, an excellent turf horse from the mid-2010s. So I really do think Team Leader is going to appreciate getting on this surface, and the blinkers going on. I feel like this is a horse that's going to have speed, and a field like this where a lot of horses have not shown speed in their first couple of starts, I think this one could be forwardly placed. So I definitely expect him to run a lot better in here. And the number 1 horse, Safe Trip Home, I find a little bit interesting. This horse definitely has turf pedigree, by More Than Ready. This one's a full sibling to a horse named So Enchanting, who was a turf winner for Chad Brown. The Dam was a multiple winner on the turf. This trainer is not really known for turf success per se, but he's got excellent statistics with first-time starters in general over the past couple of years. 10 for 29 over 2 years, 34% with an ROI that's well above $3. None of that's on the turf, but I just think this horse is a little bit interesting given the pedigree, drawn inside, and probably not going to take that much money because it's not really a household name on a major circuit like Keeneland. So just, I think, some long shots that you can use in your sequence to get in the mix and maybe create some value, because I don't think horses like Worthington and Ashcroft necessarily have to win this race.
Well, I'm with you on Safe Trip Home. I mean, it's one of those horses that I marked down. The breeding was really good. The dam ran fast on turf, according to the figures I'm looking at. It also has a 49.0 gate work, which is sort of my cutoff point for including a horse that's a first-time starter. Less so on the turf, but you any first timer you want to see have a pretty solid workout. And this trainer, he can be sneaky good. And just looking at his stats right now, he hits it with this jockey at 32% in the last several years. So, in a race that's wide open, I'll absolutely add that horse to my ticket, and I'll consider the team leader as well.
Yeah, I struggle sometimes with the stats for trainers like the number one Safe Trip Home, William Cowan's. I mean, most of the statistics you're looking at are compiled at much lesser circuits. Some of those Midwest tracks that generally have smaller fields, so it's a little bit easier to pad your win percentages there. The statistics are generally worse when these trainers do come to a larger circuit like Churchill or Keeneland or New York. But this one's going to be a price because it's not a household name. So I just think that horse might be a little bit interesting. But interesting race with many ways to go. So it's not the kind of spot where I would talk anybody off a price horse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would, because I'm only going to go deep in like two of the legs, you can go extra deep. Right. I mean, it's not that expensive to go 6 or 7 deep as opposed to 5 deep or 4 deep. You can get away with it as long as you're not too fat in a bunch of the other legs.
Well, the next race coming up, the 8th at Keeneland, the middle leg of this sequence, it's a non-winners of 2 lifetime allowance for the fillies and mares going 6 furlongs. And I found this one to be frustrating because it's just a 7-horse field. When you approach it, you think, okay, this is a spot where I want to narrow things down a little bit because it's a smaller field. I don't want to go too deep, but I find it difficult to have a strong opinion on anybody in here. Nobody seems like they're a really strong candidate to break through at this level. Many of them have had multiple chances. A couple are coming off maiden victories, but both of those have questions to answer. I didn't know quite where to start here. I will say, though, Scott, the number 5, Scenic Masterpiece, is the horse that I kind of was leaning towards keying on a little bit, because even though she's coming in from Southern California for a barn that doesn't run that much outside of that state, it does feel like she's faced some better horses in her recent starts.
The first horse I landed on was Scenic Masterpiece. A little concerned that Jonathan Wong, I've never known him to ship even outside of California, and I meant to look up to see if he had any success. I know he's only shipped 1 to Keeneland, and he hasn't had any this meet yet. So that's a concern. But at the same time, I really like the feel of the line. I think the horses, if it was in California against these horses, I would absolutely have this horse. The negatives are, aside from shipping to Keeneland, and we don't know. I mean, he's the kind of trainer that, like, once he gets good at a new location, I would expect him to be hitting at 20%. But the other thing that this horse has to worry about is it always stumbles out of the gate.
Yeah, I was just quickly looking up the statistics in Formulator, which is very easy to do if you go into the trainer filter field. The Kentucky circuit, Jonathan Wong is 0 for 2 over the past 5 years, so not very many shippers at all. And if you just look at the available circuits for him, he rarely ships east of the Rocky Mountains. So just an interesting horse to be landing in this race. But She definitely is getting some class relief here. I mean, after running in that Shillingsworth last time, even that allowance race that she was in too back at Del Mar, much tougher field than this one. The runner-up came back to run much faster. I believe that's a Bob Baffert horse. So it just feels like she might be catching the right field because, Scott, this does not feel like the strongest race for this level among the locally based runners.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did, after looking at it for long enough, I did finally land on a horse that I do like. That's actually a little bit bigger of a price than that horse, but I'm definitely going to use Scenic Masterpiece for sure.
Well, go right for it. Who do you like in this race?
Well, I finally landed on Ain't Broke, who is the rail horse. Took some time off after breaking her maiden on the lead though, and this is in Timeform US, which I always look at the pace projector, certainly for any podcast, because those are the really important races. You want to get those right, and it has a favors front runners notation on Timeform US. This horse just won her maiden race on the lead, and I don't see why she can't win it again on the lead after a 7-month break. She not only did she win her last on the lead, but she has had 7 months to develop. And on September 21st, she ran her fastest work ever, a 47 flat, 4 furlong bullet. She's got the same trainer, same jockey as she had in her last race. I think she should be able to break as long as she breaks, and we don't have to worry about Scenic Masterpiece, who's going to stumble. Still might win, but Ain't Broke should probably have the lead. And against this field, I think it's going to be hard to beat her.
Yeah, it's good that you point that out about the lack of pace in this race because it does seem like she's committed to going from the inside. Ain't Broke, that is. And coming off the layoff, horses like this are usually a little bit fresh, so you would expect them to show speed. And if she gets loose up front, I agree, she could be dangerous in here because, like you pointed out, Scenic Masterpiece does not have that gate speed. And if they don't go quickly up front, she could be one that's somewhat compromised here. So I definitely agree. Ain't Broke is a horse that I would want to include in here. I had trouble throwing out the number 2 Cancel This, who is the morning line favorite at 2-1. She just ran a race last time that makes her very competitive here. It was the best race of her career and her 12th career start, so you might wonder where it came from, that improvement after all this time, but she was 17-1 that day and faced some pretty good horses. The horse that she was in a photo for second with, Portilla, would be a heavy favorite most likely if she landed in this spot, so it just seems like maybe she's a horse that's finally come around for Dale Robin. She's now run well 3 times in a row. I don't really trust her fully as a win candidate given her overall record, but she does make a certain amount of sense in this race.
Well, this is one race where I think I'm going to get value, and the value is in going against Cancel This. I watched the race. She got a pretty hot pace. She was closing into a hot pace. She could not close the deal. She couldn't even get second. And she galloped out poorly, and to me it looked like just a peak race for her, a peak race with a great setup. And now she's 2-1 morning line. I'm all about going against her in this race, and that's where I'm going to find significant value in this pick 5.
Yeah, I do wonder how they're going to bet this race. This is not the kind of race I would like to make a morning line for. It just is a tough one. I won't be surprised if Scenic Masterpiece is the favorite. We'll see about that, but I don't disagree with your observation about Cancel This. I would be surprised if she steps forward again. We'll see if she's able to repeat that last race. A horse that I tried to make a case for is the number 6, You're So Silly, but I don't know. I found some negatives with her. Her last speed figure definitely makes her a contender here, even though she upset that field at 26-1. But now she's coming back in 2 weeks. That's a pretty quick turnaround for a horse that had plenty of time between starts prior to that. And I found a stat for her trainer, Phil Sims. Off a maiden win, he is 1 for 33 over the past 5 years with just a 13-cent ROI. So just some negatives on another horse that could take money on this spot.
Well, I'm glad you found that stat because, I'm looking at my numbers and I'm like, hey, how come I didn't mark You're So Silly as a contender? I didn't get a chance to watch her last race. So I'd like to see that race and then make a decision. As third choice, at least on the morning line, she is, she's, if Cancel This actually goes off favored, and this horse goes off at 7-2, I might include this one as well.
Yeah, this is one where I had trouble narrowing it down from the 1, 2, 5, 6, and I don't want to go 4 deep in this race. And as we talk about it a little bit, I'm kind of leaning more towards Your Horse Ain't Broke and the 5 Scenic Masterpiece based on her class, but not an easy middle leg of this pick 5 sequence. Let's move on to the stakes portion of this pick 5. Race 9, it is the Grade 1 QE2 Cup, the Queen Elizabeth II Challenge Cup, going 1.125 miles on the turf course at Keeneland. And Scott, as is often the case in these top-level turf races, Chad Brown holds a pretty strong hand here. He sends out the morning line even money favorite in the number 6 McCulloch. She's a horse who won 2 out of 3 legs of that turf triple series at Naira, both the Belmont Oaks and the Jockey Club Oaks last time, going 1 3/8 miles. I definitely don't mind the turn back to 1 1/8 miles here. I think that's well within her scope. I just wonder how much of an edge she really has over this field, both from a speed figure and class standpoint. I did not view her as the kind of horse that had to win this race at a short price.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in others. She's the kind of horse that it's hard to toss her, but I haven't been that impressed with her races. The August 7th race and the Saratoga Oaks, I actually just saw the comment that she was bumped hard to the brakes, so maybe that's an excuse in that race. With the Moonlight I was there at the track that day, and With the Moonlight was hammered to favoritism. So I mean, she was viewed as a good thing that day. Aside from that, her record's pretty good. But like her last race, she was 4-5. She got a perfect trip, and she didn't dispatch them with ease. And some of the numbers of some of the contenders here are okay. So this is the kind of horse that I'm going to use defensively, like with other non-favorites. But I'm really hoping to beat her. I think she'll be bet harder than her chances of winning are.
Yeah, I feel like she's a horse that has some reputation coming in here, but those big wins in New York, she's the Mount of Irad, and I just think that she, like you said, she's going to take a lot of money in this race, and I'm not convinced that she really deserves to be as short as she's going to be. I really like the other Chad Brown horse in this race, the number 2 Gina Romantica, and she would be my top pick in here, and I would be happy to get that 7-2 morning line if we're able to. I know that it seems like she's coming in out of weaker races on the turf, and that's probably true. She hasn't met the kind of company that McCulloch has, but I just like what I've seen from Gina Romantica in her 2 turf starts. She did get plenty of pace to close into in that risk-averse, but she closed that field down really impressively once Flavien Prat finally steered her out into the clear. That was a nice turn of foot that she displayed, and I thought she ran even better last time in that Pebbles. Even though she lost as the favorite, she drew the outside post position. There wasn't nearly as much pace in that race, and she was forced to close into some slower fractions and actually did it best of all, nearly getting to her stablemate who won the race on the front end. And I just think that she's improving at the right time. And when Chad has multiple entries in these top-level races, he usually tries to use some different running styles with his 2 horses. I doubt they're going to take McCulloch out of her best game, which is coming from just off the pace, but I wouldn't be surprised if the instructions to Flavien Prat are to get a little bit more aggressive with Gina Romantica, because there's not very much speed in this race. It's that no speed designation on TimeformUS in the pace projector, so it's a pretty murky situation, and Gina Romantica has shown good tactical speed earlier in her career, especially in her dirt races, so I wouldn't be shocked to see her on the front end here. I would love to see it, actually, and I think given her turn of foot in this paceless race, she's going to be pretty tough to run down.
Yeah, very interesting. I like the other Chad angle that you just presented, and I'm going to have to look at her races a little bit more closely. They weren't that fast, and I guess the buyers look pretty good, but the horse that I'm interested in that I think is just as fast as Gina Romantica is the 1 California Angel. She's second off a layoff. She was fast as a 2-year-old, and that means something to me. She won the Jessamine, a grade 2, at this racetrack, and then she was 14-1 in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies turf. She ended up being 11th. She started from the 14 hole, and I didn't watch the race. I mean, I think I picked her in that race, but she just didn't do well. And I haven't watched the replay, but it says that she tossed her head at the start. I really liked her comeback race. She's took six months off. She came back and she ran just a solid race came up almost the same number as Gina Romantica. She got an 83 buyer, and Gina Romantica got an 86 buyer. And the horses were winning on the lead at Kentucky Downs. It wasn't like all day, but it seemed like most of the meet speed was winning there. And so I thought that was a good comeback race, and I think she's going to go forward from that. And at 15-1, that's the horse I want in this race.
I'm definitely not going to knock a price in this race because we've seen some vintage editions of the QE2 Cup in past years. This just doesn't feel like one of them. It's a relatively weak race compared to how it usually comes up. So I'm not going to be shocked when a horse like that, with some lesser credentials coming in, is able to pose an upset. Personally, for me, when I was watching that Dueling Grounds Oaks, I just was more pulled towards the number 4, New Year's Eve, who finished right behind California Angel in that race. I agree with what you said about how forwardly placed horses were doing well at Kentucky Downs during that period of time. I thought that New Year's Eve had the slightly tougher trip because not only was she far back early, but she also had to race wide and trying to make up ground on the turn, whereas California Angel snuck up the inside. So even though she finished behind her, I liked the effort of New Year's Eve a little bit more. My problem with both of these horses is that they just have no early speed, and this is just going to be such a tough race to close into because there's no pace signed on, and I find myself kind of scratching my head as to how this race is going to be run. It's why I tried to come up with that creative idea about maybe Gina Romantica wiring the field, because it's hard to know who's going forward in here. Maybe the number 5, Bella Bell, coming in from California. I don't know what we're going to get from the number 7, Paris Peacock, the Irish runner that's coming in for Jessica Harrington. Rarely do these Euros show enough speed to get to the front end, but that pace situation just makes it a really tough race to handicap.
Yeah, well, according to the comments on Timeform, she ran pretty close to the lead. I'm talking about the 7, Paris Peacock. So maybe there's some speed, but even if she has the lead, it's probably not going to be much faster than any of these. So the other horse that really interests me, that I think that can take advantage of the slower pace, is the 5, Bella Bell, who on some numbers is just as fast as McCulloch. And she veered out in her last race. She bumped a horse to her outside. It was a pretty serious bump, but once she righted the ship, she was professional and ended up second behind Spenderella. I kind of find it hard to believe that with Phil D'Amato and Rispoli shipping in, that she'll be as high as 5-1, but maybe, because there are the 2 Chads. But Bella Bell, I think, is a really strong candidate to win here.
Yeah, I was leaning in that direction too with regard to how they're going to bet this race. I have trouble seeing her being a bigger price than New Year's Eve, just given their recent performances. But as you said, she's got that Spenderella name in her running line. Spenderella probably would have usurped McCulloch as the even money favorite if she were in this race, but she is not racing for the rest of the year. So hopefully she's back next year for trainer Grab Motion. But I agree, Bella Bella is a horse that I could include because she's got that tactical speed, and it does seem like her performances are trending in the right direction, even though I usually do try to fade these Southern California runners when they come east. This is not the toughest grade 1 that you're going to find in the Kentucky circuit.
Yeah, and I've just been clicking through the Timeform speed figures for the horses in this race, and Gina Romantica does get the highest last out Craig figure of 117, and that means something. So I'm definitely going to, based on your enthusiasm for her, I'm definitely going to use her as well as California Angel and Bella Bell.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that high speed figure on Gina Romantica last time is due to the pace upgrades and downgrades that Craig builds into his speed figures. This is one of those situations where she actually got a higher speed figure than the winner of the race because she was the one who was closing into a slow pace, or one of those races with blue color-coded fractions that you see in the TimeformUS PPs. So she actually got a much higher, or a 1 point higher speed figure than the winner, which is why she's coming in with one of the faster last out speed figures. So that's one of the reasons that I do like her. And I'm hoping that they can change up her running style a little bit in this spot. Let's move on to the final leg of this pick 5 sequence, and doesn't get too easy here. An 11-horse field, a starter allowance race. These are always difficult handicapping affairs because you have horses typically coming in from different class levels that can run for this starter allowance condition repeated times. This one is at 6 furlongs on the dirt, and I think a couple horses that will take money in here are the number 7 Feast and the number 10 Beverly Park, the latter of which is just a really likable horse for trainer Norm Cash, who likes to run his horses very often, and this one has responded well to that aggressive schedule, just basically turning into a win machine over the past couple seasons. But even though this horse is coming off a victory last time, it feels like he's finding himself in a tougher race here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty crazy race, and it says it's going to have a hot pace, and the Norm Cash. I'm just trying to scroll down to my PPs to see Beverly Park if she's going to be part of that speed brigade. She does like to run pretty close, and she's carrying a little higher weight than these, and she's on the outside, so I don't have a problem going against her. She is 3 for 5 at Keeneland, and she's 9 for 21 at the distance. So, like, those are reasons to like her. But in such a crazy race, I'm just not going to be thrilled with the 9-2, and possibly lower. So, and Feast is a horse that I definitely thought could win, certainly based on speed figures. But the big drawback to that horse for me is that the trainer has never won at Keeneland.
Yeah, I've got questions about both of these horses, and I do feel like they could be the 2 favorites in this race. Feast, watching the last race at Monmouth Park, it felt like the runner-up gave it to him more than Feast actually doing the work to win the race, because when you watch it, I mean, you can hear in the announcer, Frank Miramatti's voice, his surprise. Hollis took over that race, opened up almost a length on Feast right at the wire, and then just pulled himself up for some reason and allowed Feast to come back on him. It was a really odd situation. So I almost view that as a loss for Feast last time out. He has been in great form prior to that, but was doing it for a different trainer. As you said, this barn doesn't really ship to a track like Keeneland that often. And also, he's a horse that is a one-dimensional speed type, and there is so much pace signed on in this race. I mean, looking at the TimeformUS pace projector, not surprised to see it with the red flag for a fast pace. And the first 6 runners that I see on that pace projector in order, they all want to be on the lead. I mean, Beverly Park, that number 10 who we were just talking about, he's actually shown in 6th place on the pace projector, and I doubt his connections want him to be that far back, but I think that just speaks to how much speed is drawn inside of him. So I project a difficult trip for that horse and potentially a difficult trip for Feast as well. So I wanted to find some horses that could come from off the pace, Scott, and I was interested in a couple of long shots. I'll mention one of them, the number 2, Alexandros. I know that he was involved in the pace last time against Beverly Park, but he was coming off a long layoff that day, hadn't raced since January, and sometimes these horses coming back off a layoff, they can get a little bit keen, not use their typical running style, and it felt like maybe the connections were just giving him a prep that day. Now he's second off. His typical style is to come from mid-pack. He doesn't have to be out the back door early, but he's not one that's going to be involved in that pace in a race like this, and he's got plenty of prior speed figures that put him in the mix, so if he's anywhere near that 12-1, he's one that I would definitely want to use.
Well, Alexandros is actually my top pick, so I would love to counterpoint you on that horse, but I'm just going to have to get on board with you. I really liked that he showed speed in the return. He did get a 1 red fraction or 1 red call on Timeform pace numbers, and then he faded. And this is sort of a classic angle where a horse that doesn't normally show speed is basically given a solid workout, show speed, like this, make this horse run and get something out of it off the layoff. So I like his chances second off the layoff, because now he's got that solid workout and race under his belt, and now he's got the inside. he's going to have like all this insanity going on in front of him. He's going to be able to sit back, and it's just the classic second off a layoff move. The trainer, the trainer is I don't know if she's married to David Vance, but her middle name is Vance, and it was trained by David Vance before. She's doing well. She's hitting at 23% of only 13 races. And this horse shows a nice bullet workout since that last race, a 46.4, best of 114 at Churchill.
Clearly, we have a very similar take on this horse. I'm not sure we're going to get the 12-1, though I wouldn't be surprised if we do, because there are so many ways to go in this race. And he is coming off a subpar last out effort, but definitely some angles with that one. Another horse that interested me here is the number 1, Don't Forget. Also a horse that's coming out of that Beverly Park race last time out at Churchill Downs. That was kind of a merry-go-round affair, not a whole lot of closing going on in that race, and I think that worked against a horse like Don't Forget, who really does want some pace to close into. And I know it seems like his form is tailing off a little bit. It seems that way when you just look at his speed figure pattern, but sometimes a horse like this just needs to find the right pace situation to wake up, and he feels like another one that's going to be a little bit ignored on the tote board potentially, and could get in the mix if this pace comes apart.
Yeah, Don't Forget. I'm like quickly trying to find this horse. Does have some back numbers. Does seem pretty off form at this point. So, I'm not thrilled with the idea of the horse, but the pace situation does work, and the trainer is hitting at 15% lifetime at Keeneland with a 252 ROI. Maybe he's been just playing possum until this race.
Is there anybody else in the race that you'd want to mention? A look to a horse that could get the right trip or has some hidden form, because it's a tough race to narrow things down to just one or two runners, because it does feel pretty wide open.
Well, there is, I'm looking at the pace situation right now. Just based on pure numbers, I was really interested in a couple of them. But the one that shows the sort of best closing style out of the horses that I'm interested in is the 5 Montauk Daddy, who was claimed, I think he was claimed by Joe Sharp off of Orlando Noda at Saratoga. Has had some time off, and its last big win was in the Slop, but it also has some pretty solid wins going on the fast track at Belmont. And I think this horse, because it's a closer and it didn't run its brains out in those races, it ran pretty well, but like not exceptionally giant speed figures. I think that horse has a good long shot chance, and I'll be using him.
That horse is going to be a price, so I would definitely not talk you off him. Joe Sharp can be sneaky off the claim sometimes. I generally prefer him with horses going longer off the claim than shorter when I look at the stats, but like I said, this horse is going to be a big price in here, and this is a race where you do want to keep an open mind and get a little creative, I think. A horse that I think could also take advantage of the pace situation that seems pretty obvious is the number 4, Ultimate. Coming in from a different circuit, he's been racing at Prairie Meadows, but has been competing in some decent races there. Didn't do too well on a stakes 2 back, but all of his other surrounding speed figures make him very logical here. He's got the right kind of running style to be successful. So I just wonder if he's a horse that might get a little ignored because of connections and the circuit he's coming from. But I think everything else makes him a player in this spot.
Yeah, nothing against Timothy Martin. I don't know anything about him except that he's a pretty low percentage trainer. I mean, I'm looking at his numbers, and he's 12%. He's 12%. It seems over the last 6,000 races, which is not bad, and he's 17% last 90 days. But he's never won or even been in the money at Keeneland. I guess in this field he could, that he could notch his first win, and the running style is positive. So, I'll give him some serious second thoughts, some second look, between now and the time to play this pick 5. Sure.
Yeah, he's the kind of horse that I would want close to that morning line on 8-1 for all the reasons you mentioned, the connections. Horses like this, you wanted prices, even though based on his past performances, if those races had been at Churchill and Keeneland, he probably would be 3-1 as opposed to 8-1. But I think you're going to get a bigger price just because of where he's coming from. Well, that wraps up our handicapping of the sequence. Scott, I want to briefly just go back to look at how we might construct tickets. I don't think we've really talked before about ticket structure, what kind of pick 5 player you might be or how you approach things like this. So just talk a little bit about that, especially for a sequence like this where it doesn't seem like there's an obvious single. How would you go about tackling races like this where you do have to figure out where to spread and where to go thinly?
Well, let's say that I don't really have a single unless I end out just singling Sunny River in the 6th race, which is a possibility because I do want to go kind of deeper in some of the other races, and I may just sort of only do that kind of a play where I single Sunny River and just and keep my ticket affordable, so that like if Sunny River does get beat, at least it won't be painful. It'll be just more of an action play. So I'd be thinking about singling him in that race. I'd go deep in the 7th race, and I'd be using Worthington as my main play, but I'd also use My Sanctuary. I think Daryl's Bolt. I have to look at my notes for you. You also Safe Trip Home. I haven't typed that up, but I can get away with, if I'm only singled in the first leg and I've got like 2 horses in another race or two, then I can go like 6 or 7 deep in this race and the last race, which I think are both going to be potentially insane. Should I be going through the whole sequence or?
Yeah, just wrap it up how you feel like, where you'd want to lean. You don't have to list every horse because we kind of went in depth already, but, just basically structure-wise, horses that you'd want to anchor on in the races where you want to go a little bit thinner.
Yeah, I'd probably go only 2 deep in the 8th race with Ain't Broke and Scenic Masterpiece, with a pretty strong preference for Ain't Broke. In the 9th race, I probably just go skinny with California Angel and Bella Bell. I think that McCulloch can win this race, but I wouldn't want any pick 5 payoff that had McCulloch and Sunny River in the same sequence, because then it's just not worth it. So maybe I would do McCulloch, a ticket with McCulloch and that Oma horse, Oma the Great, in the first leg. But I'm not sure. I think I may just I may just play against McCulloch because Bella Bell is just about as fast, and and then you also sort of got me interested in Gina Romantica, so yeah, I'm gonna toss McCulloch when I get on my pod later for the Sport of Kings pod. I will be trying to take a stand against McCulloch.
And then it's funny the way that works out. Sometimes you talk about the races a little bit and it kind of hardens your opinions and develops them a little bit more.
Well, yeah. And that's, the great thing about these podcasts is I take notes and I adjust my play, and usually, on my podcast through Chris, and it can be also through our guests, I usually use a couple of the horses, and I'm usually glad I did at least one of the times.
Yeah, it definitely pays off to keep an open mind and, listen to your smart friends, because sometimes they'll look at races in a way that you might have overlooked, and it's hard to stay on top of every angle in these sequences. Did you have anything else to finish up with the sequence, or should I go?
No, I wanted to hear how you're going to play this.
Well, I thought you made a really good point about not wanting to have too many, if any, tickets that include both Sunny River in that first leg and McCulloch in the stakes. I know you were a little bit more confident in the chances of Sunny River than I am. I have a slight negative take on her and a pretty negative take on McCulloch, just given my other opinions in that race. So I would want to de-emphasize both of those horses when I'm playing the sequence. And like you said, not really have any money going through a ticket that includes both of them. In the first leg, while I agree Sunny River can obviously win, I do want to include that long shot Oma the Great. Just by process of elimination, I'm going to have Forever After All, the 8, on my tickets as well. I just think she's a horse that can do well here. The one short price I would want to fade a little bit is Inventing, but that's a tricky way to begin it, as we already covered. That maiden race, that is the second leg, race 7, I would use Worthington, not use the other short price, the number 11 Ashcroft. I do not like that Wesley Ward horse. I would strongly use the number 9 Team Leader, who I really think is going to improve on the turf. And then some other bigger prices. I agree with Scott on the 8 Daryl's Bolt. I would definitely include that one. And the number 1 Safe Trip Home, that first-time starter that I mentioned. It's definitely a race where you can go a little bit deeper. I didn't mention the 12 Giovannino, who's got a tough post position, but he's another that I could potentially throw in if the price is right. In the 8th race, Scott kind of talked me a little bit onto the number 1 Ain't Broke. I agree that horse is finding herself in a pretty favorable situation coming back off the layoff. I do view the number 5 Scenic Masterpiece as the horse to beat. I'd lean primarily on those two. Not that I think Cancel This and You're So Silly can't win this race. I just preferred those other two a little bit more in that middle leg. In the QE2 Cup, I already said I like Gina Romantica quite a bit in here. If I was playing an ABC sort of ticket, she'd be my only A in this race, and I would try to downgrade McCulloch a little bit. I think New Year's Eve can win. I don't love the pace situation, but at the right price, she's one that I could include. And then the last leg, I do view it as a spread race. I'm not sure if I'd want to have much play going through Feast or Beverly Park because they just sort of feel like the uninteresting options in here. But at bigger prices, I would definitely want to include horses that could close into the pace as long as this field holds together, like the number 1 Don't Forget, especially the number 2 Alexandros, and the number 4 Ultimate. Well, Scott, hopefully we gave people some opinions they can use in this sequence. And as Scott said, he'll be recording his own Sport of Kings podcast later today. Do you have a guest on this week, Scott?
We do have a guest. It's first time on our pod is Sean Borman, who I'm really looking forward to getting his opinion because he's got some great insight. I've listened to him on the In the Money Media podcast.
Well, make sure to check out Scott's podcast because he and Chris do a great job with that. And Scott, if people want to follow you, just quickly mention where they can find your stuff or if they want to follow you on Twitter.
Sure. You can find me at Carsoni SOK, Carsoni SOK.
Well, Scott, thank you very much for coming on, for making the time to do this. I really appreciate it. As I did with Marcus on Monday, I appreciate the guests making time in their busy schedule to come on and join me on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I am delighted to be on, and even though I'm doing 2 pods of the same podcast, I love matching wits with you, and I love hearing your opinion, and hopefully it'll inform my pick 5. Especially with your Gina Romantica, and also that interesting horse that you picked, that you're using, Safe Trip Home. So thanks again for having me.
Well, everybody, thanks for listening this week. Remember that you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to tune in to the TimeformUS Pacecast next week when my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski makes his return.